Remember Days Gone? Incredibly, as of the creation of this video, it's been almost exactly half a decade since it originally released. Developed by Bend Studio, Days Gone was one of the final high-profile first-party exclusives for the PlayStation 4. After many years in development, the pressure was high for Bend to drop a game that made good on Sony's huge financial investment. When it was finally released into the wild, Days Gone was ultimately met with mixed reviews and seemed to disappoint the powers that be. A sequel was shelved before ever leaving pre-production as key members of the development team began to depart the studio. Yes, the narrative of Days Gone's existence seems to be gloomy at best, but the game itself has a very different story to tell.
Do it. Don't leave me out here, man.
Days Gone takes place in what has become an all too familiar setting, the apocalypse. In this ill-fated world, a virus is causing everyone to turn into deranged, hungry creatures that, while not technically the undead, share a lot in common with their zombified brethren. Predictably, this pandemic quickly falls into chaos, forcing protagonist Deacon St. John to part ways with his wife during the tumult of the initial outbreak. Unwilling to leave his friend Boozer when the helicopter out of town hits its weight capacity, Deacon opts to stay behind, while critically wounded Sarah flies off in search of medical intervention. From there, Days Gone jumps 2 years into the future, picking up with Deacon and Boozer on the road. The overall plot covers a lot of ground as you fight to survive in such a perilous world. Unsurprisingly, Days Gone's post-apocalyptic setting has invited innumerable comparisons to The Last of Us, given that both titles are published by Sony. But while the backdrops may be similar, the stories of both games are notably different, not just in terms of content, but also structure. Unlike The Last of Us, Days Gone features an open world, meaning that such specifically placed linear storytelling isn't possible. Instead, the game opts to feature multiple story threads at once, affording you some flexibility in how you choose to tackle them. While the greater plot will unfold the same way for everyone, there exist instances where you can choose the order of particular story missions.
If conducting operations in quarantine zones, if I encounter any civilians or civilians, then I'm forbidden from making contact.
This flexible story structure reflects a narrative that's kind of all over the place. One minute you're finding medical supplies for an injured Boozer, and the next, you're chasing down the agent that rode away on the helicopter with Sarah. There are often so many story threads active at once, the game actually lays them out for you, going so far as to display your completion percentage for each. As you may expect, this open-ended structure means that Days Gone often lacks focus. The game juggles so much at once, the plot initially struggles to find momentum. This is common in open-world games, but is particularly noteworthy in one published by Sony, a company so widely renowned for its storytelling. The good news is that the narrative's nuts and bolts form a whole greater than the sum of its parts. For example, the game's script is consistently sharp, lending depth to characters that one might assume wouldn't have any. Upon first glance, I assumed Boozer would be a foul-mouthed, aggressive jerk, making my discovery of his rather empathetic nature all the more satisfying. In general, Days Gone's characters consistently subvert expectations. That's not to say that any of them will exist in the pantheon of legendary PlayStation icons, but I think most players will be surprised by the texture with which this cast is painted.
I know you want to smash something. I see that look in your eyes, but you know what? You go right ahead, but you do it out there.
Daddy,
go. Look, there is nothing else you can do.
Deacon serves as a memorable protagonist, which is especially important given how much time you spend with him. Again, going into playing Days Gone, I expected very little from Deacon. I'm not exactly sure to what I attribute this skepticism. Maybe it was simply his appearance, or perhaps even I had begun to buy into The Last of Us comparisons. It's hard to compete when you exist adjacent to Joel, but Deacon is able to carve out a distinct niche. He's witty, flippant, and yes, perpetually moody, but remains a character that you're able to get behind. This is partially thanks to the dialogue, but I think is mostly attributable to actor Sam Witwer's performance. He lends Deacon a slightly unhinged tone and delivers almost every line in a surprising way. In the hands of a less capable actor, I think Deacon could have ended up feeling generic, but Witwer manages to inject him with genuine personality. Particularly in open-world games, the player character often feels simply like an avatar through which to explore the space around you, but Deacon always feels like a real person. On occasion, he flirts with chauvinism, but ultimately stands as a vibrant tour guide through a seriously messed up place.
If anybody touches this bike, or anything on it, I break your fingers. Whatever, man.
In terms of its structure, Days Gone will feel familiar for those of you well-versed in open-world games. Story missions beckon you to all corners of the sprawling map to complete any number of different objectives. There are a few different mission types, most of which feature combat in some form or another. Your primary means of offense are firearms, but you can also scoop up a melee weapon to deal some more personal blows. Typically, your task is to infiltrate territory either controlled by antagonistic humans or overrun by the infected, colloquially known as freakers. The story will paint each mission with its respective context, but the actual mission mechanics will begin to blur together, which isn't necessarily a bad thing given their foundationally strong qualities. The world is peppered with camps of survivors that offer a glimpse into how different groups are managing survival. Completing missions for the camps builds your trust that unlocks additional purchases and upgrades in that particular camp.
Listen to me, okay? Seriously, don't work here like you do everyone else.
Don't tell me how to run my camp.
Ranged combat feels great, with guns carrying the appropriate heft, but also vitally contains the right amount of challenge. You can utilize a stealthy approach to pick off enemies one by one, but once your cover's blown, your life can end quickly without quick wits and an aptitude for locating cover. Popping up to take shots at enemies feels great, with the almighty headshot ever important to achieve. Accuracy can be hard to come by, particularly when using sidearms, but an upgradable focus ability enables you to briefly slow down time to maximize each shot. This skill is extremely important given the rigorous nature of combat and feels fantastic to use, particularly when dealing with the freakers. These ravenous entities provide a very different kind of combat experience when compared to bouts with humans. Unable to use firearms, freakers are inclined to rush you, often forcing a melee-oriented response. This is fine when dealing with one or two, but you'll quickly learn that freakers prefer to travel in packs, rendering your baseball bat or machete as moot. You can still bust out the guns when dealing with larger numbers, but even bullets will only get you so far. Dispatching groups of freakers effectively usually requires utilizing your surroundings to your advantage. For example, you may pass by an explosive gas canister when being chased, providing an opportunity to catch your pursuers in the blaze. If you want to control the crowds effectively, you're going to have to find ways to eliminate a large number of freakers in one fell swoop. On occasion, you'll stumble upon a massive freaker herd. You could attempt to face it if you wish, but your odds of victory are virtually zero. Until you've leveled up your weaponry and abilities through unlockable skill trees, these hordes are simply too formidable to face. This is a really smart decision as it contributes to the brutality of Days Gone's world. It's also surprising given how much the herds were used in Days Gone's pre-release promotional material. The possibility of running into an enemy that you simply can't defeat is genuinely unsettling. Sure, RPGs feature areas that contain overleveled enemies all the time, but there's a big difference between imbalanced stats and a humongous wave of infected cannibals completely enveloping you in real time. Importantly, freakers are faster than Deacon given his limited sprint duration. Typically in games, you can simply run away from an encounter gone bad, but here, an ill-timed dose of hubris can leave you with no choice but to succumb to the Grim Reaper. Death carries little consequence as you simply respawn at a recent checkpoint, but still, in a game like this, it helps to feel like an untimely demise is lurking behind every corner. This sense of danger is expertly baked into the entirety of Days Gone. Particularly notable is its scarcity of resources. Ammunition, for example, is incredibly valuable. You can pay to restock your supply at one of the various camps strewn around the world, but when you're out in the wild, you've got to earn every bullet. This limitation makes every shot count, which makes combat feel much more purposeful than simply mowing down whomever gets in your way. It pays to scavenge every felled enemy once you've emerged victorious. This scarcity mindset is typically applied to linear survival horror games, but Days Gone implements it into a wide open world to great effect. Exploration feels legitimately worthwhile and rewarding, exactly what you want when presented with a non-linear space.
What? No, you're not taking me to some goddamn camp. I can ride, damn it.
We're not Damn it, Boozer, it's just for a few days.
Of course, any open world needs to be filled with compelling activities, and Days Gone mostly delivers. There are three primary types of side content, the first being human hideouts. These small areas feature a number of human enemies that need to be dispatched before you can take over their territory. It seems like almost every open world game features some kind of kill enemies to take zone activity, and Days Gone does little to innovate on the formula. Despite this, they're still fun to tackle, allowing for flexibility in your approach for domination. Zones overrun with freakers are also commonplace and function similarly to human-controlled territory with one key difference. Instead of simply eliminating all freakers in an area, you have to burn down a set number of freaker nests. Finally, Nero checkpoints can be infiltrated to upgrade your maximum health, sprint, or focus duration. There are some story-oriented side quests as well, rounding out a healthy selection of optional content. None of it is particularly innovative, but I found all of it to be fun, particularly in conjunction with Days Gone's satisfying character progression. I'll admit that I'm susceptible to open-world checklist syndrome, but even I often run out of steam when attempting to complete all that such a game has to offer. I never ran out of steam with Days Gone. It's impossible to fully unpack this game without an examination of what is perhaps Days Gone's most iconic element, the motorcycle. From the moment you gain control of Deacon, you're on his bike, and this mode of transportation remains a critical part of the experience until the end. Obviously, the bike serves as the best way to get from point A to B, but you're afforded the capacity to upgrade it much more than what is typical for an open-world steed, organic or mechanical. As you progress the story, you're presented with additional options to improve your ride, such as increased durability, top speed, or even fuel efficiency. That's right, you actually consume gas as you travel, demanding that you stay ever vigilant in your search for that sacred nectar. Such restrictions may sound frustrating, and I imagine some players will prefer a more streamlined experience, but I found the fuel limitation to further ground me in my surroundings. Thanks to such rewarding progression, you really develop a connection with the bike over the course of the game. This isn't some disposable car you've stolen, it's a part of Deacon's identity. If you ride recklessly and damage the bike, it's incumbent on you to repair it. I can't recall an open-world game in which your means of transport is so critical to the experience since 2015's criminally underrated Mad Max, but it's a mechanic that I think deserves much more exploration.
We should get back to my automotive tabernacle, Saint. So much to show in this sanctum.
The world of Days Gone is striking, both visually and mechanically. Bend Studios' decision to place the game in its backyard of the Pacific Northwest pays huge dividends. Simply put, you're not going to find many games set in Oregon, a location that provides plenty of varied landscapes and beautiful vegetation. The degradation of the roads and structures is also compelling, often forcing you to dip off the beaten path to avoid a pileup of cars. Just as important, however, is the practical brutality of this world. The genre and aesthetic of Days Gone naturally lend themselves to a game that's difficult, and thankfully, Days Gone is. Beyond limited resources and powerful enemies, the challenge stems from a world that feels like it's on the offense. At any time while riding your bike, you can be thrown off by a rogue freaker or well-perched sniper. You can stumble onto a pack of wolves that will begin hunting you down. You may run out of gas and be forced to desperately search for a container of fuel. The back of Days Gone's box contains the tagline, "This world comes for you," and the game ultimately delivers on that promise. Upon its initial release, Days Gone was heavily criticized in reviews for poor performance and myriad presentational glitches. It seems like those issues severely impacted the journalistic perception of the game and ultimately its aggregate review scores. I didn't get to Days Gone when it first released, so I don't know what that experience was like, but playing the game in 2024 on a PlayStation 5 leaves barely a trace of inoptimization. Through numerous patches and updates, Days Gone has grown into a stable, gorgeous game that lives up to the standards set by other PlayStation first parties. Of course, it lacks the supreme polish of titles from Naughty Dog or Sony Santa Monica, but I firmly believe that if this were the version of Days Gone that existed from the get-go, its reception could have been much rosier.
And I know what kind of man he is. What he's done. He done any worse than you? Ricky? How about me? Do it.
What's wrong?
I make no claim that Days Gone is perfect. Its narrative is cluttered, the melee combat feels floaty and unsatisfying, and it occasionally falls victim to redundancy. Yet these issues amount to small blemishes on what I'd argue is a severely underrated experience. Perhaps more importantly, they're issues that could have been addressed in a sequel, something we'll likely never get given the game's critical reception. To some degree, I think Days Gone has fallen victim to the pristine standards of Sony. Despite ultimately selling millions of copies, Days Gone couldn't match the revered reputation of titles like God of War or, yes, The Last of Us, a game that cast a shadow that Ben's studio struggled to maneuver out from under. Despite this, Days Gone deserves your attention and crafts an identity all its own. It's a little scrappier, a little more rough around the edges, just like its protagonist. It's a visceral, engaging game that deserves to be remembered.
What did you do?